So you might be a third or fourth year student at the final stretch of your degree, or you might be in the final stretch of your grad degree, and you have a job lined up. So you're wondering whether or not marks still matter, and if you should still care about your final assignments and your final exams. So the question you have to ask yourself is, how much of a risk taker are you? And risk here is whether or not you are comfortable with knowing the unknown, because in the future you might have a future employer that does ask you for a transcript. Are you going to be okay knowing that you bombed your last semester, and that the explanation that you're going to give to them is, I had a job lined up and I just didn't care anymore, and I, just did poorly on all my final exams and marks. Another risk that you might have is, how certain are you that you won't want to reapply to go back to school again in a few years' time? Whether it be you get your organization to sponsor you to do an MBA, or if you're in grad school, whether or not you think, in a few years' time you might come back for another master's, or you might go for your PhD, because then obviously your final years definitely count towards your grad school GPA in terms of the admission cycle. So you want to make sure that you end up doing well, so that it gives you that opportunity in the future to come back to school should you need it. And then finally, there might be instances where you apply to a job where they seek out high scholars, and obviously, again, the GPA will matter. You want to make sure that you on your transcript you're showing that you are a consistent student, year after year, semester after semester, and you don't want that final semester to indicate that you're the type to just give up, or to throw things aside once you already find the final result. It's not a very good look. So obviously this really boils down to the risks, whether or not you're comfortable portraying a different person than who you really are, or that you might walk into a situation in the future where your grades do matter, and that you took this risk, and that now you're in the situation of being lower in the priority criteria list, and you might be bumped into the wait list. So if you are in the position of the final stretch of your degree, and you already have a job lined up, and you're asking yourself, should I really care about my grades and my final assignments? Then really ask yourself, how comfortable are you taking this risk? For myself, I was in a very similar situation. Everyone in my cohort was also in the same situation, and some of my friends did take that risk and say, I'm not going to go back to school anymore. This is my last my last degree after grad school. I already have a job lined up. My final assignments don't matter, and they really bombed it. But to them, they were certain that they didn't have to go back to school. They were certain that they didn't want to come back to school anymore. So that risk was fine. But for me, I didn't know if I wanted to go back to school. So I still continued to do really well on my assignments. And then in a few years' time, I did decide to go back to grad school again for a second time. So, things happen. You never know what happens in the future. But, really consider yourself, how willing are you going to take that risk? And, how certain are you that in the future something isn't going to happen that makes you want to go back to school, for example?